For more than 2 years, mystery, intrigue, and confusion has surrounded the Pentagon Secret UFO Study, known as AATIP. First, the Pentagon said it did study UFOs. That was before they told the Black Vault, no, actually, they did not, and that was all wrong. Luis Elizondo claims to have headed that very program, and he told the Black Vault that yes, they did tackle the UFO topic, and he stands by that to this day. The Pentagon previously denied his involvement in the program altogether, but may even be changing that story as well. Only time will tell. But with a saga full of flip-flops and conflicting stories, the biggest question, at least in my mind, is what side do you want to believe? Well, my guest today is retired police lieutenant and investigative journalist Tim McMillan. No stranger to this program, Tim published a bombshell article for Popular Mechanics just last Friday. He showcased never-before-seen documents, reports, and records that claim yes, there was a UFO connection to AATIP, and his evidence can prove it. How did that article come about? What revelations were inside? Tim is here to break it all down for us. Stay tuned. You're about to journey inside the Black Vault. That's right, everybody. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and taking this journey inside the Black Vault with me. I'm your host, John Greenwald Jr., and joining me on today's journey, no stranger to this program, like I mentioned in that introduction, Tim McMillan. Tim, all the way from Germany. How are you?
What's going on, man? Doing good. Had a little bit of an audio mix-up. Ran us behind, but man, it's great to see you.
It's good to see you too. I'm glad that we got that figured out. And yeah, it was. It's never fun trying to link up two different countries. So I appreciate your patience trying to get it. We all see you're on the cell phone, but at least we can still see you. So that's good. So we had to figure out a little bit of a backup for the audio. But hey, it's hopefully sounding good to everybody. Sounds good in my ear. Chat room, obviously, if you're watching live, feel free to let me know how it sounds. Nothing is ever perfection in live, but hey, we get there as close as we can. So anyway, Tim, thank you so much for joining me back on this program. I was thinking after today's program, I think you have more airtime on this show than me, and I host the damn thing. You've been on quite a few times, but rightfully so. You are literally making the headlines right now with some of the biggest stories that we've seen. So congratulations to your continued success, especially with last Friday's article.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, no, I promise I will not try to take over the show. But if so, I will invite you back on from time to time.
Well, you know what? Nobody wants to hear me talk anyway, so you roll with it. You run with it. Everybody's here to listen to you, but I appreciate that. And that article has obviously created quite a few shockwaves for a few different reasons. And what I want to start with, we don't have to go through the whole article, but what I do want to urge those that are watching, that are listening on the podcast version, make sure that you do take the time after this program, if you haven't already, to read the article. There is so much literally to unpack in there. I mean, you dealt with an awful lot. Where I want you to start is just pretend that none of us have read the article. Give me just kind of the big bullet points to you. What was about this article that made this really the viral story that was? It's everywhere right now.
Well, I mean, the bullet points was this was my journey, if you will. I've told people before, I am and do not profess to be a classically trained journalist, nor do I often even refer to myself as that. I'm an investigator. I'm a career investigator. That's what my background I come from. That's what I did for a living for almost 2 decades. So I'm an investigator who sometimes writes. And for this one, When I got interested into the whole AATIP, AWSAP, everything since December 2017 that came out. Obviously, I mean, you know as well as anybody, there's been a lot of back and forth, confusion, contention, the whole 9 yards. And so this is really the results of me going out there and seeing if I could get some clarity to what these programs were doing. What was the truth of the people who were saying they were involved in them? There were two different conflicting stories, one that was from the Pentagon officially, and then one from the people who were involved in the program. So this was getting clarity to that. I say that up front so that everybody, I know since it's been released, there's a lot of stuff that goes with it. Everybody has their own opinions or, what they think about it. But the scope of this solely lied with what is AATIP, what is AWSAP, and then central to that was also Mr. Luis Elizondo. What is his involvement? Because he is a central figure to the AATIP aspect of this. And so, this is results of, a lot of great work that a lot of people like yourself, Keith Basterfield, a lot of people don't realize how much they contributed to this. And I mean, across, whether it's UFO Twitter, whether it's Reddit, I mean, there's a lot of good open source material that allowed me to kind of springboard into it and start tracking down people who were involved in these programs, people who might know something about these programs. Now, the kind of 5,000 foot view that you want, the broad strokes here is the conclusion for me. We can get into what was the most fascinating part to me towards the end, but the conclusion was that in terms of the Pentagon's assertion that that AWSAP and AATIP were not UFO programs, that would appear, based on talking to multiple people who are involved in these programs, and the material evidence came forth, that was demonstrably false. However, it was compelling to me how they went about keeping it secret. I mean, there was a purposeful attempt to try to make sure that AWSAP was never viewed as a UFO program. So the first part of that is that, I feel the preponderance of evidence was AWSAP was UFO. That we can say. Did AATIP conclude after the AWSAP contract was finished? That was another part of this whole story. That side of it as well, there were enough people that I spoke to or just material evidence that came across that said, yes, to some capacity, this was going on. Clarified, in my opinion, I think to some extent, because, I've said I don't know how much of it was media hyperbole, how much of it was just, there was a lot of Mandela effect as well. When I went back listening to people's interviews, I went, well, they didn't say that, but it was interpreted as this. But it was, was this a program that you think of in the classical sense, as in like, there's the office, I'm looking for the AATIP office of the Pentagon. And that's not true. That's not what was going on. It was a bootstrap program, which meant that Mr. Elizondo brought it under his assigned responsibilities through OUSDI. And he took this on, it's called a portfolio. So he took this portfolio on and was being aided by other interested parties throughout the government, Office of Naval Intelligence, this type of stuff. So it became a de facto UFO office. But I want to make sure I'm clear there as well. Just because it was de facto and brought over, it was still approved by the Secretary of Defense's office. So it wasn't, I think even initially I thought, well, was this just a water cooler club? Did they just sit around and talk UFOs? But no, there was some sanctioned involvement in it, which would require them to have access to classified materials. And then it came in terms of that coincides with Mr. Elizondo and his, involvement in it. In which, by all intents and purposes, and the materials that I got, people I talked to, indeed, he was the point man doing this. So if you want to call him the director, the leader, the manager, it's semantics.
It's semantics. I gotcha. And let me kind of back you up before we get too far, because I want to talk about Mr. Elizondo as well. Obviously, a big topic on this program. You and I have chatted about him before. I've talked about him extensively, and to my surprise, actually talked with him on the record here in the last month or two. And I want to get into all that. But before we do, I want to back you up to the UFO aspect to this, which is something that admittedly I've struggled on kind of seeing the multiple facets of what AWSAP and AATIP were, and whether or not that they really did deal with UFOs. Now, as we already dealt with in the top video introduction to your piece, there's been a lot of flip-flopping involved. There's a lot of let's play both sides here. There's a lot of like lack of evidence from an official level, not only with official statements and stuff like that, but with the 38 reports that were generated under AAWSAP. There's like this confusion, like, well, wait a minute, there's nothing that says UFOs. Some borderline the topic, absolutely, but you kind of have that evidence. Then on the other side, you have Mr. Luis Elizondo. You have some of the information that I want to get into right now that you came out with your article that says, yes, in fact, it did have to do with UFOs. Then you have the obvious Pentagon official line going from telling the New York Post, who broke the story, yes, we dealt with unidentified aerial phenomena. And then I got entwined into this whole thing to my surprise, because I wasn't fishing for this. The Pentagon then changes that in December of 2019 with me, and that article got obviously published in December, and they flip-flopped. Now, why I wanted to preface it with that is I want to ask you, why is there this seemingly reluctance by the U.S. government to say, yes, this was UFOs? Because we do know that they are talking about UAPs, UFOs. They are admitting that they have videos. So it's like on one hand, they're saying, yeah, what's the big deal? Well, these are 3 UFO videos. That was a story that ran last year. They investigate them. They've got these guidelines. But then on the other hand, they're like, no. AATIP didn't look into this. AWSAP didn't look into this. What in the world is that confusion and reluctance?
Well, and I think, that the kind of key to understanding all of it is it is very so nuanced and complex. You do kind of have to break it down, because AWSAP is something different than AATIP, in complexity and scope. And so looking at just AWSAP, one, to answer your question simply, I don't know that there's any overt cover-up by the U.S. government per se, that they were lying and trying to do that. Was there potentially a lack of effort on some people's parts to look into some stuff? Sure. And when you're specifically when we're talking about AWSAP first, it was structured by design to avoid being discussed by the government, frankly, and UFOs. In the article, I shared that fact. When I got the 10-month report, which was the first annual report with it, it corroborated what I had been told up to that point, is that when this contract was initially structured, it was structured in a manner where, how the BA got interested in wanting to do this is still a mystery. We have the anecdotal accounts that they went to a Skinwalker ranch. Maybe that's true. I don't know. That I didn't have any material evidence to back up. But clearly something in 2007 got them interested. And that is when Bigelow Aerospace founded first a subsidiary company in October, and then later BAASS, that we all know and love, in January. So 6 months before the contract was due. So this was a complete carve-out, which meant this company was established for this contract, which hadn't even been issued yet, which is interesting. And in this contract, they were going to be examining different aspects of UFO, UAP. I say different aspects, a multitude of aspects. However, that material was going to be maintained as proprietary property, meaning it belongs to BAASS. It is intellectual property that belongs to BAASS, and under federal law can't be released by the government. And they technically don't own it. Now, they can receive it. They can go through it. There, somewhere there at the Pentagon, there may very well be this report along with others, but they can't give it out because it's BAASS property. And so all of the UFO stuff, for the most part, was supposed to be maintained in proprietary property, and so that it wasn't something that the U.S. government had to discuss. The actual contract for AWSAP was just what you've discussed for years, and what's been discussed is these different technical reports. And so that was the forward facing of what was going to be the product being purchased. So the $22 million that was being purchased was for these technical reports.
And those are U.S. government property, taxpayer funded, not proprietary or hidden under a corporate shield, right? So I'm making sure I'm following. Okay. But then there was this other hidden objective of AWSAP through Bigelow Aerospace's subsidiary, BAASS. I just want to make sure that I'm following and everybody watching as well. But so so BAASS was set up to get the AAWSAP contract. The forward-facing stuff was the 38 DIRD reports, but behind the scenes, BAASS was maintaining control of all of the UFO information.
Yes.
Okay.
But they were, and to get a real good understanding of it, and that's why when I spoke to the watchdog, government oversight, about it, I was shocked when I explained to him how this was going on, and his immediate response was, "Oh yeah, totally typical, very, very normal for intelligence operations." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." This was run, and he made a very salient point. I don't think made it into the article for the final copy. It was the first clue that this wasn't a technical assessment in terms of technology innovation. The assessment is the AAWSAP contract. It was ran through the DIA and not DARPA. He said DARPA is who handles that. He said the DIA is an intelligence arm of it. And so this was run like an intelligence operation, which is what makes this probably the most fascinating thing to me. And I know a lot of people are like, what's in the 10-month report? Is there all this great stuff? And I'm sure we'll discuss that. But I think that the most significant part that a lot of people missed, and it's kind of how I closed that article, the kind of thoughts I want to leave people lingering with, is this was done under the auspice, UFOs are real. We're not investigating to determine whether they're real or not. Now, I didn't see anything in that report that said what they are, or a multitude of things that they could have been. But this was a scientific intelligence assessment, in which was to determine those 38 reports represent this is the pinnacle of our scientific knowledge at this point and the foreseeable future up to 50 years or whatever. So this is the best we can think of for what could explain UFOs. Now, what is that gap? Does our foreseeable ideas of how a UFO could spontaneously take off, how could a UFO appear have different perceptions for people? What is our best ability to come up with ideas for how that could happen? And does it adequately explain it? And how big is that gap? So this was very much like you would do if you were assessing a foreign adversary, a foreign government. What is their technology? How close are we to it? And so that's where, it was a scientific intelligence assessment of UFOs, but it was a metric to measure what is the technology and knowledge gap between us and them. Yeah. Because I can't stress enough, what UFOs are was not outside the scope. I was agnostic to that. It was more of these programs. And so for me, that was a very fascinating aspect, because I think a lot of people were hoping that report would reveal more about what they are. And frankly, at least from what I saw, that seemed to be somewhat of an afterthought, if that makes any sense. It was more like, well, how close can we get to them type assessment.
Let me give some context for everybody that's watching and listening about this report that we're talking about, because this to me is the most important one. Actually, there's a couple, but one of the most important parts of your article that you brought forward that no one else has been able to do. And that was get your hands on the 490 plus page that was originally reported. You reported as 494 pages. This is a quote from your article. The 494-page 10-month report, as it's called, is chock full of strategic plans, project summaries, data tables, charts, descriptions of biological field effects, physical characteristics, methods of detection, theoretical capabilities, witness interviews, photographs, and case synopses, each one entirely explicitly about unexplained aerial phenomena. So obviously this goes back to day one when AATIP was reported that it generated a 490 plus page report, but nobody has seen it. It should be noted you were unable to publish it, right? The source that gave you that, just for clarity, you were told you can't publish it, but you were able to publish the cover, right? And then a chart, and I think a one other single page, right? That was, I'm hoping I'm not missing anything. But other than that, they said you couldn't publish it. Tim, would you like to name those anonymous sources now?
Sure, it was. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I'm just putting,
no,
obviously putting on the spot there. But so that's the context of the 490-page report. Now the question is for me that I want to ask you, now that we have a little bit of context of that, is the cover page obviously has BAASS on it, and you listed on there, I don't have the quote, but it was, you've already mentioned it, proprietary information could not be copied without the express permission of BAASS, which essentially meant it was copyrighted or essentially not a government work. On that document, if I can pry a little bit, did it say AATIP, AWSAP? Like, did it mention, like, here's the deliverable? Because we do know the DIRDs had that. Did this as well?
No, it did not. And I'm I'm more than happy to talk on that report, because I know a lot of people have a lot of questions about that and its source validity and everything. It did not. And it referred to the sponsor throughout the entire report. And so, even though I was able to see it, hold it, and look at it, and realize that, again, this was more, is this report valid? Was this what they turned into the DIA? I didn't look and determine if what was in it was, is this the smoking gun? However, it referred to the sponsor throughout it, which, again, I thought was weird. Who's the sponsor? And so kind of sourcing that out. And one thing I want to make sure it's probably best just to give some people some backstory here is kind of why I say I'm not a classically trained journalist. I approach things like a criminal investigator. And one of my jobs before I left policing was I worked atypical or asymmetrical organized crime, which means people who are involved in criminal networks oftentimes have an asymmetrical connection between each other. The neighborhoods they go to school, or excuse me, where they go to school, the neighborhoods they grow up, the family, this type of stuff. The guy who steals the car sells it to the guy from the neighborhood, vice versa. Well, I worked intelligence on those, so you could know those networks. And so that type of tactic came in very handy with this, because that's how I had to deal with it, was what were these asymmetrical connections between different individuals. And so in terms of the source, when I was allowed to see it, I said, and I asked the same thing, where's the DIA? Where's this? And they, said that, says that, the sponsor. I said, well, how do I know the sponsor's not Chick-fil-A? I mean, and so I had to go out and not just take the person who let me see this report's word for it. I had to go try to determine that out. And so, one good source of open source evidence was a interview with George Knapp and Robert Bigelow, August 28th, 2008, 2 days before SAP started, or 1 day before it officially started for that fiscal year. And you hear Robert Bigelow describing exactly what they're going to be doing 2 days before the contract starts, and describing his sponsors. And we now know later, okay, the DIA was funding the AWSAP program that we're going through here. And I'm sorry, let me just quickly ask. So he was describing, because I'm not familiar with that interview. So he was describing a UFO research program in 2008. Yes, I encourage anybody to look it up. I'm not sure that interview is still publicly online, I believe, and I don't have his website address off the top of my head. If you can, like Keith Basterfield's a great person and I can get you that link. But I believe Keith Basterfield, who's a phenomenal analyst, I believe he may have a transcript of that as well. But if you listen to the interview and between George Knapp and Robert Bigelow, you see it now, and you realize he is describing AWSAP. He describes it to a T. What they'll be doing, that it won't be a forward-facing, that they'll be doing it in the shadows, that this is the sponsor who will be doing this. We just got a sponsor, and they were just awarded the contract right before then. So you have all these little anecdotal clues that, for me, I'm a behavior analyst too. I'm looking at this going, okay, I got you, homie. So we keep going, digging in there. I will say that some of the people who, in addition to the person who let me see that, they said that was the BAASS AWSAP one. I don't mind. He was on the record. I'll say that I did, right before publication, ask Dr. Hal Putoff, and why would any materials that were produced say the sponsor and not the DIA, because the DIA was the sponsor. And he said that was just, and he was not speaking about the Tim McMillan report. I want to make sure I don't say that. How put off I can say under oath was not the source, but he said that's just common practice. And when you're talking about an intelligence type report, as this was, is the structure that this was set up. It was one of these things that if it gets in the wrong hands, you want to have some distance between who the real sponsor is and this. So if somebody just picked it up on the side of the road, they may not know that this is associated with the DIA. And so that's why it was specifically structured like that. But you won't find any other reference of a sponsor, BAASS having a sponsor other than the DIA. Unfortunately, Mr. Bigelow or Mr. Kelleher, anybody that represented the Bigelow Aerospace are unable to talk about it, potentially because of contractual agreements with the government. So, I can't confirm it with them. I had to work through all these other things. But the other thing that I'll say that was a big clue that kind of falls into the same circumstantial thing is the date that's on the front cover of that report. And that date was June 30th. That coincides, and the reason it's a 10-month report. A 10-month report is because the first year of the first fiscal contract, the first 2 months eat up the contract, the bidding process. So you only have 10 months for your first year of a government contract as opposed to a full 12. So the fact that it said that alone was a really big clue that this was, at a minimum, something working off the United States government fiscal calendar. And so I would say that a preponderance of evidence, but in terms of what your overarching question is, did it ever have the stamp DIA on it? No. I feel like it was adequately explained why, but I am one of those people that I felt good in the. I worked this as if I was going to present this to a case to a jury and try it in a courtroom, and I felt good about bringing it there. I don't speak in definites though. But I feel like I'd have a good jury trial. I could get a conviction here.
What's interesting about your article, just again for those listening and watching, is that this isn't just Tim's interpretation. What really surprised me, and again, that's not a lack of trust of what your word was and is, but rather you went out and got Pogo to give you a statement, and these groups that specialize in government secrecy, government transparency, and I love the line, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially like the debate of whether or not this was right or wrong is a different, that's something else, but this is actually how it's done. And, I've looked into government secrets and conspiracies and cover-ups and so on for 23 years, and I'm always amazed to see that type of supporting quotations that you got. So kudos to you that, again, this was not just your interpretation. And again, I'm speaking to the audience here, but not just your interpretation, that you in your article went out and got government transparency groups to come in and essentially say, yeah, this is this makes sense. And I would say that too was a very key part of your article that someone like myself really kind of it resonated with, because again, you have the expertise on top of your vetting and so on. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure those that were listening were aware of that as well. So digging in just a little bit more in this report, obviously we've touched on the fact that it was all about UAPs. I read your quotation from the article that it had all sorts of stuff in there, from witness interviews, photographs, case synopses, and so on. In this report, can I ask, was there a conclusion section? I know you said that it didn't draw any conclusions, but was there kind of a final summary of everything, or was this just kind of like a big report that was handed over?
This was a big report that was handed over. I mean, that's what this was not. And it's crazy to think of 500 pages in it. There wasn't like the closing chapter that says, all right, ladies and gentlemen, here it is. Here goes the Roswell body. But that's not what this was for either. And I want to make sure, it was impressive because, and that's what I've kind of relayed to some people, whether it's online and everything, is that there was no one section contained a immense amount of depth. So I think that one of the charts I presented was UFOs over nuclear sites back in 1975. There was no conclusion to that. This was just used in a section where they were talking about a nuclear connection with it, and something that they were looking into and data they were collecting. Each one of these just gave broad, quick, broad little chapters of this is why we think it's significant. This is what we want to do. Mm-hmm. This is what we have done this past year. But there was no, it was just recently tonight asked me about, was there any good photographs? And there was a couple, photographs, but this was not even a good picture book of mm-hmm. UFO pictures. I think the most impressive one I saw appeared to be, a fairly close saucer-shaped, but black and white photograph that was provided by the Brazilian government. But there weren't a whole lot of photos, that type of stuff.
Well, that in itself, not to interrupt you, that in itself is really interesting. I mean, is that a photograph that's known, that you've seen it before, or was this kind of like something that was potentially, I don't know if classified is the right word, but something that no one has seen before?
I'm not familiar with ever seeing that photograph before. But, I also, me, I tell people I'm not, I think that the UFO topic is something that's significant enough that it deserves real investigation. It deserves real coverage and deserves to be treated so and not be diminished like a lot of people do. And I don't think it's a quick hit news piece, clickbait piece mm-hmm. That it's so often treated. But I'm not a ufologist. And, I try very hard to, depending on what area I'm going into, to absorb it. And so could this photograph be out there somewhere? Maybe. I have mm-hmm. never seen it before.
Oh, I won't hold you to it. I was just kind of curious, like what, like what the photo was, because that's pretty interesting. If a world government gave this over, even if it was just a corporation, had nothing to do with the U.S. government, that in itself is pretty interesting in my book.
There was a lot of references to a lot of good close cooperation with South American companies, mm-hmm. Countries with BAASS. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know what kind of relationships are there. That particular photo, I believe, absolutely was captured by. I'm about 90% Brazil. I should have grabbed my notes and everything. If it wasn't Brazil, it was Peru. But it was a South American country, mm-hmm. and it was captured by their military and provided to BAASS. And so there was detailed notes about the coordination. I mean, they had established a very expansive network of collection and data. And I think for me, again, the investigative side of me, the analyst side of me, like the parts that I really wanted to see. And everybody's like, well, then what did it show? I wanted the data side, and it just kind of gave you a broad overview. But it did detail that some very sophisticated data scientists, data scientific analysis was going into this sighting data. Mm-hmm. And the data that was coming from MUFON or other sources were being extrapolated, and they were using it for different type of linear regression models to try the stuff that I've wondered why isn't being done, mm-hmm. frankly, to get some real good. I mean, that's the stuff that. And that's one of the reasons I reached out to Mick West in the article. I know he gets a lot of flack, but I'm like, if this data that they collected was made public and it showed this, a statistically significant this, would that change the dynamic of mm-hmm. how you view the UFO subject? And I mean, he was very genuine saying, well, yeah, if you have that data and serious evidence, that can change the dynamic. Mm-hmm. As to yet, we haven't seen that. And so I would love to see that. But that, I assume that information was provided to the DIA. I assume that information is, BAASS still has it, or, mm-hmm. or Bigelow Aerospace, I should say. I didn't see any of those, and I'm a math guy, so I'd have been looking for the linear models. I'd have tell you guys, I'm telling you, I saw it. It says it's statistically significant. It's true. They're blue avians, but I didn't see that. But
yeah.
But there was a lot of stuff like that was interesting. And so some of that may have been coming from South American government. How they went about those contacts, I'm going to leave that to them and the DIA and everybody else.
Yeah. But, well, let me ask you really a quick question about the orchestration here of keeping the UFO stuff secret. obviously we're going to get into sources here, and I joked earlier about, naming them, and I'm not prodding for that. But in your research, did you learn really who is responsible, even at like an agency, for saying we cannot be attached to UFO research and we have to shield that in the corporate world and in the non-government contract, create that separation? Is there a consensus of who or what entity is calling that shot?
It wouldn't be fair for me to say that broadly. Mm-hmm. So speaking for the whole government and everything, I can tell you in the instance of AWSAP and this, let's narrow it down to just AWSAP. In the instance of that program, it was the DIA. And the reason I can say that fairly conclusively is I think it was mentioned and even chuckled about on Twitter that Dr. Christopher Green, Kit Green, said in his study when he told me, he said, and he was genuinely, when I said, hey, Kit, I got something I want to see if you can verify. He was like, I didn't know it was published. What's going on here? But he was very gracious and candid and said one of the things that shocked him is it wasn't peer reviewed. And I think that was, people, of course it wasn't peer reviewed, silly UFOs. No. The other DIRDs that you're seeing in that DIRD list were peer reviewed by the DIA, by their government peer reviewing standards and everything before they were made. The reason Kit Green's was not, according to Kit, was because his was too UFO. And I mean, if you see it, I think I list how many times he mentioned the word UFO. And so for the forward-facing documents they wanted, his was too UFO, which is also why, if you'll note on the January 2018 letter that they sent to the Senate Armed Services Committee, detailing these were the products open for publication, keyword, out of AATIP. You'll notice Kit Green's study and one other one weren't in the congressional server, meaning that any member of Congress could pull it up and take a look at it. If they wanted those, the DIA would be happy to provide them upon request. And so those weren't even, but they still called them products for it. I mean, Dr. Green said he was paid from actually EarthTech, subcontracted from BAASS to provide the study, but his was too UFO-centric. So in this instance, I can't tell you for the broad 70-year United States government, but it was the DIA who didn't want Kit Green's too UFO study in there.
Yeah. And the reason why I ask is I'm curious, just if you'll indulge me with this question about the secrecy, because obviously I love that aspect of all of these types of stories, and especially with the DIA. I mean, some of the most heavily classified UFO documents, away from AATIP, away from AWSAP, reside within the DIA, and it's been a big struggle to get some of that out. So my question is just that, with that secrecy capability, the fact that the U.S. intelligence community can have top secret information, top secret programs, SAPs. I mean, you're obviously more of an expert on that than I am. I've interviewed you about that very topic on this program with special access programs, unacknowledged SAPs, so on and so forth. When you have all of that at your disposal for the DIA to shield their interest and just put it under classification, my question is, why wouldn't they do that, but rather give it to a corporation? And this is probably going to come off bad, and I don't mean it to be, but give it to a corporation whose CEO will go on television and say, I believe aliens are walking among us. And so that to me is like a huge gamble, because obviously in 2008, which I found interesting, and I wrote it down. I'm going to look it up, and I'll make sure that I inform everybody who's watching and listening what that link is to the interview. But he was, meaning Robert Bigelow, was obviously out there talking about it, even in vague terms in 2008. So long-winded way of asking, why wouldn't they just classify this in some highly classified setting that probably wouldn't see the light of day for 50 years anyway?
And, that's a question that I could only speculate on. And so I want to make sure I caveat that, because that's not, nobody told me.
I'm holding you to this, Tim. This is it. I'm
okay.
Yeah, this has to be gospel or you can't answer. No, I know it's speculation. And in fairness, I know it's speculation.
I think it's for a multitude of reasons, one of which is also hiding it from within government. And I know that sounds silly, But people need to realize that the government is, that's part of the problem with all of this is that the nuances that go on in a bureaucratic government are crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And understand that just because you have this administration who's like, no, this is something serious, we need to look at it, doesn't mean that the next administration isn't going to think it's silly and want to make you look bad or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. I mean, there's a lot of political motives. I mean, that is key to how our government runs. It's very political.
Mm-hmm.
And the turnover, and you see every 4 to 8 years, you're going to have a new directors of all of these administrations. And so this keeps it away from them as well. But I do get what you're saying as to, well, what stops Robert Bigelow from publishing all this stuff? I don't know this for a fact, but I would imagine it is some type of contractual legal agreement that went along with that initial AAWSAP contract.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that is because, I see people, oh, Bigelow's holding out on us. He's the Mr. Burns of ufology. I don't know that. I think that he's, bound by these same kind of bureaucratic oaths that everybody else is to get in there to do this, because I've never had the opportunity to talk to Mr. Bigelow, but I did find a 1999 interview where, had I got a chance to talk to him, I would ask him, if he's listening, Mr. Bigelow, I'd ask you what changed, because in 1999 he was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal. And he said, there's not enough being done by government to prepare people that this reality exists. Mm-hmm. And if indeed a UFO showed up on the White House lawn, people would run to the gun store before they would, embrace that there's other intelligent life in this universe. And so there's this weird contradiction here, because now if you go into this program where you're like, man, you've got all the data, but you can't share it, aren't you kind of the problem? So mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't know why they would go about it other than it safeguards a considerable amount of there's not as many cooks in there that can come in from the government side, and it limits the access to it. I mean, it's a very interesting dynamic where now the contractor controls it, and so even if another government administration comes along, they can say, no, it's all ours. There's nothing to see here. Mm-hmm. It is, and I agree with you 100%. That is why, and I spoke to more people than just Pogo or the FOIA attorney that I spoke to. I spoke to several FOIA attorneys, several government oversight people, just because if waiting for one outlier to say, oh yeah, that's crazy. I can't believe I've never heard of that. But mm-hmm. when everyone was like, yep, mm-hmm, totally is done all the time. And I found out that is very common in the aerospace industry, frankly. That is very, very common as a means of, engaging in blue sky study, or just studies you don't want to have to deal with, mm-hmm. per se, and keeping it up. But I agree, it does limit this. It does take this control away, but I'll just tell people it's not as crazy as you think when you consider that the Atomic Energy Commission was a private organization that controlled all of America's nuclear weapons, the most deadly weapons in the world, was a civilian-run organization up until 1979 when they started the. So, it's not as crazy as it may seem.
Yeah, and just to reinforce that point, I mean, the fact that you have those people coming aboard and saying that. Again, that surprised even me, and I'm a harsh, skeptic about some of this stuff. But when you see that and you see who's putting their weight behind it on whether or not, again, aside from the fact if it's a right or wrong thing, that to me is something that really I hope people that are listening and watching see that from your article and appreciate the lengths that you did to go and verify that you challenged what you were being told and found verification rather than pushback on, no, that's not how it is. So kudos to you from that standpoint. I want to ask you too a little bit about something that another situation where I've been fairly skeptical about the inclusion of Skinwalker Ranch and its involvement in AAWSAP. And there's a lot of rumors out there, and you've obviously dove in a little bit in your article with Skinwalker Ranch. Tell everybody, did you find that connection, that Skinwalker Ranch played a huge role in AAWSAP, or no?
Huge role, no. I mean, it is mentioned. It was mentioned in the report. I specifically mentioned it was mentioned as a, how was it termed, a potential living laboratory. for non-human intelligences. So they were saying that there was something going on here. But I believe it may have been reported, don't hold me to this because I could be getting this wrong, that the entirety of the AWSAP money went towards Skinwalker Ranch.
That was the rumor. That has been reported that it was like all into that. And I've always struggled with that concept, but that is one of the rumors out there.
No, not based on the 10-month report I saw. No. And no one I spoke to. And, there's people that are in there that are unnamed sources that provide material, but there's a lot of other people who were former BAASS employees who work in aerospace industry, who worked, they were worked there a couple of years while they're going through grad school at UNLV. There, these types of people. And so I talked to them, and they had said, yeah, no, we went out to Skinwalker Ranch. Mm-hmm. Some of these people even said, I don't really believe all this, but they did, and they were collecting all this stuff. Mm-hmm. But it was not the focal point by no means. I mean, it was a small section that just went in with all the other stuff that was going on there. There was a lot. The post-effects medical study stuff was fascinating. Kit Green's study that we published was really just an archive review. I know people are like, where's the real good data? Mm-hmm. But that's what he was commissioned for, and he told me, this was what could account for these types of injuries. This was not and that's what there's only so many words you can put in an article, but he was very clear in making sure that I realized that the title of that was clinical review, meaning this is not research where I'm getting patients, I'm doing that. He has done some of that, but that is different from what was done there. But that side of it was very interesting. They included some of the medical effects in South America, some stuff that was disturbing. People, disturbing injuries that people claim had occurred there. But Skinwalker Ranch, to answer your overall question, was not the focal point, but it was included. Yeah, it absolutely was included.
And in case we haven't made it clear, Tim was able to get his hands on the full report that he's referencing from Dr. Kit Green. Apologies if we've already covered that. I don't think we mentioned specifically, though. That entire paper is embedded in your article. The only reason I'm making that point is I think it was on my mobile that I first read your article, and I missed it. I didn't realize that the full paper was embedded in there. And so for those listening and watching, make sure you do not miss. Tim got his hands on that as well, and it's a great nugget that is in your article that, again, may be missed by some. So make sure you don't miss it. Let me ask you if you could maybe either confirm this myth or dispel it, one of the two, with that, now that we know that Skinwalker was involved at least a little bit, but not obviously the focal point. Two things on this. Was it the headquarters of AWSAP that some have claimed? Was this the home of where they did all their study? Sounds like not, but
no, I did not see anything to that effect. And,
again, just dispelling those rumors that have been widely. Those are widely published. Which again, I'm glad that I can ask somebody who's seen actual evidence these questions, so we can just kind of put it to bed. The other thing was that the big rumor that's been circulating was that AATIP was the UFO aspect to this. Which it sounds like quite possibly it could be with Mr. Elizondo's testimony, given it, that's exactly how it went, that part is true. And AWSAP was paranormal, ghosts, cryptozoology, poltergeists. Again, sounds crazy, but that is a widely circulated rumor. Did you see evidence of that in the report?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, did you say no or yes?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, this would be a good segue, if you would like, to talk about the difference between AATIP and AWSAP. But yes, in terms of AWSAP, there was a number of things that would be described by most people as largely more paranormal, esoteric. The word interdimensional was used. The word EBE came up.
Okay, that caught me off guard. I was expecting you to say no. So you're saying that in addition to UAPs, that 10-month report went into much else? Yes. Interesting.
Yes.
I had no idea that answer was coming.
Well, and that's, yes, it covered the gambit. And that's what I mean from this could be ball lightning, but then, pointing out, there's really actually no scientific consistency of what the hell ball lightning is. and to abduction research, to interdimensional, to time travelers, you name it. I mean, this was a UFO convention in textbook. And so, and I'm not saying that to diminish any of it. I don't know.
Sure.
It could be one or all of the above. I mean, I'd love to know, but in terms of what AWSAP covered, yes.
That's like, what is there a consensus of what the intelligence the intelligence reasoning for that? I mean, I'm genuinely curious why the DIA would say, okay, we want to look into potentially interdimensional, or again, getting into spiritual aspects of this. What was that about?
You've had John Doe who's come in contact with something who he believes is an interdimensional traveler, and he has either some physical evidence or some anecdotal evidence and maybe some additional eyewitness testimony evidence that supports that something weird happened. But he's saying that these were interdimensional travelers, this type of stuff. So this is, this is assessing not are they interdimensional or not per se. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But what kind of technology or what kind of phenomena? I mean, UAP was used throughout that, and I just want to make that point clear because I know you found a document where UAP was used many, many years ago in the U.S. government, but it's largely been, it came back up, I think, in the early 90s with the UK, the MOD. It really just kind of had its big reveal here lately. But UAP was the word used throughout the entire report. It was not UFO. And so I thought it was interesting because the government now is willing to say, oh, yeah, that's UAP in those Navy videos. And, where'd you get that word from? Well, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
We stole it from Vic Pope. But it was not as much, is this an interdimensional traveler? But what types of technologies or what types of something has the capability to alter reality, frankly, our perception of reality? Is there a technology out there that can interfere with how you perceive and experience the world around you? So it did run all these gambits, but it didn't say for certain, like, okay, well, this is the werewolves at Skinwalker Ranch. They're there. It was more like, is there something? Can you think of a way that we could do this, even theoretically, type thing? So it could all be the same, or it could all be different. And so that's where the technological aspect comes into it. It was really not, frankly, if you were going to study it from a very broad, because it is a very broad topic. I mean, it is not just Kenneth Arnold and the flying saucers in the sky. There's so many different things where you have experiencers, you have these different things. And so it was, what could account for all of that type deal? And can we figure out how to replicate it? And I don't mean that sounding sinisterly, like, let's get back MK Ultra, everybody. I mean, if it's not us doing it, who's doing it and how? And so again, that's just kind of the broad view, but I can't stress enough, even though it's 500 pages, you're expecting, like your biology textbook, you at least know a little bit about biology. Imagine short chapters with so much stuff. And they looked at a lot of stuff. And I mentioned that the first page inside that 10-month report lists every BAASS contractor who had the clearance to be approved in the program. There was a lot of people. People don't realize. There was a lot of names. I named some of the names in there that I felt weren't going to be shockers, like Jacques Vallée, John Schuessler. Oh, I might not have named him in the article. I just did now. Congratulations. There were some other names that came up there. But there were a lot of names I didn't recognize. I mean, that's what I think was most fascinating for me, was there was people who I think, people be surprised that they were involved in this type of thing. And I didn't write all those names down before anybody asked. There was a lot going on in this, a very, very lot going on in this. But they did, in terms of your first question, I'm going off a tangent here.
No, that's okay. Tangent away.
Yeah, I see you making notes over here. avoid Tim's emails. So they there was a difference in how AATIP was run from AWSAP. Now that is true, and that is true. And I don't know this for a fact, but I was told from some of the people who were involved in both the AWSAP and then the later AATIP program in there. You've heard Mr. Elizondo say he took the woo out of it and kind of brought it back in. And I think, it likes to be, again, it's great hyperbole and fodder for people who are uber skeptics about it, who say, oh, the space poltergeist, and they were looking at werewolves and all of this type of stuff. They were looking at the gambit of stuff, but that is where when you've heard them say, some people said there were demons and we shouldn't be looking at it. Well, because they were looking at demons. They were looking at everything on the table when Mr. Elizondo came in, and what we will call AATIP, all right, was a much different structured program. And so that all of the, I hate saying woo, because, we could get off of here and I could have an experience. And, at the end of the day, I'm not crazy. I don't think anybody's crazy. I think these are compelling stories. But some of that more esoteric, maybe, or metaphysical, maybe more of a nuts and bolts type thing came up when it came to the AATIP. Because I think, if nothing else, there was this realization, when we talk about a technology assessment, it was, okay, we're like 1,000 years from figuring out how we could shapeshift into a werewolf. But maybe we're not too far off from figuring out how a solid craft could do this. And so it was more focused on that. It was narrowed in on that.
With the 10-month report, obviously you did the math. That worked out from the start of AWSAP to 10 months in, and that followed. We know from the DIRD reports they were delivered for 24 months, approximately 2 years. Is there a second report?
I was not told about one.
Okay.
I can assume there was one. That was not, I was not told about one. We can assume there was one, although I wouldn't know. I mean, because it was being held in proprietary, I don't want to say definitively there was a 10-month report, because some of the people who were involved as BAASS contractors told me that they were only able to complete what they called phase 1 of this project.
Okay.
Phase 2 was not able to be completed because of the lack of funding and cutoff. And so I'm not sure what that means, and I'm not sure if once the funding got cut off in June or whatever, if they say, well, it's proprietary anyway, forget you. You're not getting our 10-month report or our 1-year report at this point. I don't know. I will say I would love to know, because I felt like what I saw in that 10-month report gave the most comprehensive but yet broad overview of everything you could think of that this topic could be associated with. And I'm like, well, what did you do the next year? Let's get the band back together. What's in this one? I don't know. I can speculate, because it did give strategic plans of things that they wanted to do. One of them that I thought was interesting. And this is a good one for those researchers out there that, he said, I can't do all this and don't want to.
Yeah.
And, we all collectively, and I mean that, is that, they named that one of the things they wanted to do was host a series of intellectual debate forums of, the potential revealing of an extraterrestrial presence on planet Earth that was, I believe they specifically named the Northern California regions area. So,
wow.
Circa 2009, anybody attended any debates? Call me, John, or anybody else. Take to Twitter, because that would be interesting. They described this as being a legitimate. This would be something that would be academics, philosophers, people really discussing what are the ramifications of this. I didn't necessarily interpret that to mean that, like, all right, we're ready to disclose it, but more what impacts can we foresee if that happens? I'd love to know if those went on. I'd love to know what the results of those were.
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely be interested in that, because if they put a whopper of, near 500 pages together in that first 10 months, like you said, a matter of deduction, they probably have a second one. quite possibly even fatter than the first one. So in the last 20 minutes or so, because the time's just flying by with you, I knew that this would happen. And I do want to get into the Mr. Elizondo document that you have in there and what that proves or disproves. I want to get your thoughts on that. Before I do, though, based on the BAASS / you had mentioned ramifications, you had posted a tweet out there that the Pentagon and Bigelow Aerospace were, and I don't have and please fill in the blank. Well, what's the word you use? That they were kind of not floundering, but they were
going nuts, trying to figure out where the leaks were.
So they're trying to figure out where the leak is. That's my question. What is that reaction? Because obviously that's based from something. Can I poke a little bit and ask, like, where have you heard from the Pentagon that they're upset, and from BAASS or Bigelow that they're upset? If I can, I know I'm probably
no. And if we were late coming on, it's totally up to you. We can talk longer, so I don't want you to feel like you've got to get off just for me, because I know this is such a big thing. I know a lot of people have questions. Are we taking questions, by the way?
I'll put the phone number on, and I'll take some text message. I still got a lot more, Tim. Don't cut me off yet.
Okay. Okay. Forget the public. Anyway.
Yeah. Come on, guys. No, I've been watching. I've been watching the chat room too. But I'll put the number on.
Okay. I know there's a lot of people that have questions, and this is an easy way for me to answer all yours and anybody else's because I can talk freely. But okay. What did you say now? What was your question?
Now I totally forgot. So the post that you said that the Pentagon was again upset that you got these leaks, Bigelow Aerospace upset. I wanted to hone in on that reaction. Like, can you elaborate on that at all?
I can elaborate in saying that obviously some of the people who provided information or have been very, very helpful during this are still in certain places. And, when it comes to the DOD saying that the OSD was going nuts, I thought that was interesting that I received a text message, saying right shortly after I posted the Thursday night. Actually, the Thursday night I posted that saying tomorrow it's coming, and even gave some teases of some of the stuff that was coming. And I received a message saying that, good luck tomorrow. By the way, OSD is going nuts right now. Be on the lookout because there's some people at OSD who aren't happy, and you're probably going to face some pushback on Twitter and these other outlets. Take a look. And they just said, but there's still people in the DOD and U.S. government. There was a lot of things that said they believe this is a serious topic and, keep doing what you're doing. That was somebody who had provided some information. So they'd already kind of verified themselves to be where they were. And I don't want to get them in trouble, but I'll just say, sure. Within about 30 minutes, I heard from Susan Go, the Pentagon spokesperson, after I got the message. Hadn't heard from her in 21 days. And that was one of the things I want to make sure everybody is very clear when I tried to verify everything. I was fair with everybody. Mm-hmm. The Pentagon has everything that was in that article and more. They have names of individuals to speak to. They have page numbers for reports to look at. They had this going back to December all the way up until January. And what delayed publication, people probably, I had teased it was coming out Wednesday. It was going to come out Wednesday. However, I wanted to be 100% fair, and Thursday was the deadline for DOD policy and federal law that they had to respond to us. And I said, let's give them credit due. And so shortly after that, I heard from Mrs. Go, who asked me to delay publication for a little bit. And I think
she asked you to delay. Yeah, that's.
yeah.
I don't mean to laugh at that. I'm just. It's like, come on, really? Making you wait that long.
Some of it going back to December, and I don't want to bash her because I've had nice conversations with her. And in fact, after that, this past Saturday, we had some nice correspondences where I told her, you didn't meet the DOD policy in federal law when you needed to respond to me. Like I I didn't have to give them all this information.
Yeah.
But I don't want to blindside everybody. Like, I'm not trying. I do believe that if there's more out there, that there is a contingency of people inside government who want to see it come out. Maybe there's some that don't, but I think we've got to try to work together. And I don't want an antagonistic relationship. That's why I gave them what I had and said, "This is what's coming. What do you want to respond?" And so, yeah, no, she asked me to delay a week, but it was already in the chute. It was lined up. There was no coming back.
Yeah.
But we had a nice conversation Saturday where she apologized and understood. But I also understand I kind of delivered a lot of I'll clean it up, a lot of poop burgers in their lap pretty quickly, you know, because I gave them specific stuff. So I'll be interested to see what their response is. Just so you know, I don't expect them to come out and say, "We were wrong." About it all.
Well, and
that'll be interesting.
That's kind of leading into my next question, is that Vice News, there's a journalist, MJ Banias. I think you know MJ, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good guy.
Yeah, I met him.
He and I we're all dads, you included. He's going to be a guest on this program. We're trying to line up our schedules because obviously I have to record during certain times with my kids and vice versa with him. So he's coming on. He's going to be on here as well. But the reason I bring up MJ is that in Vice News, they got a statement from the Pentagon. You may have gotten it as well, but just to kind of throw MJ's article in the discussion, that in the next coming weeks, I'm paraphrasing, but in the coming weeks, the Pentagon will be submitting new statements, obviously tying into why she asked you to hold off. I'm being ghosted. She hasn't even given me a, "Hey, we'll get back to you" statement. I'm getting ghosted, and I've been trying to get some stuff as well. Can I ask you what you think she's going to say or change or reinforce, or do you have any idea?
They were going to war with Iran. I mean, some deviation. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I honestly don't know. Other than I'll say, that in our last conversation, she explained to me that part of the reason that it's taken, because it held up publication. People don't realize it. We were ready to go for beginning of January, but we were trying to give the Pentagon an adequate amount of time to look at this because I didn't want to embarrass anybody. I wanted to hear what everybody's side has to say. And she just told me that they had looked at the information I provided. It had caused them to go through multiple offices and multiple iterations, and that the statement would be the ramifications of what everything was a statement that was not just for me. It would be a statement for everyone, and so therefore that's what had taken a little more time.
I got you.
So I don't know. I mean, I really don't know what it will be. I would say the Kit Green study kind of, that put them in a bad spot. Everything else, was like, "Oh yeah, no idea BAASS was doing that." But, they told their bosses, the congressional Democratic elected leaders of the American people, one of them, the late John McCain, these are the products of AATIP. Kit Green's study was a product of AATIP. Mm-hmm. Here is his study. It says UFO. Like, even if they want to just say, "Okay, well, all the rest of the birds were UFO, but that one was, all right, you got it." Maybe. I don't know. I don't know. I would hope that it provides a lot of clarity because and I didn't dig into that as much, and this will be coming in the next one, because I think the next thing for me is, all right, the government was doing this much, UFO work. Oh, wait, it's still going on. Well, what are we doing now? Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what I'll be working on next. And so part of that is knowing who the players are who are doing it now.
Yeah.
But being sensitive to the fact that, and I can't stress that enough in terms of the sources and why a lot of these people, this may be a portfolio that they have under their purview, but these are people who have their primary jobs are national security positions that are very important in government. And I stand by the fact that I'm trying to uphold the Constitution, and so are they. And, we're both doing our jobs for the Constitution. And so I'm not going to burn people who are chasing terrorists and bad guys, but also happen to be doing UFO intelligence. Mm-hmm. And so but it would be good. I mean, I have heard, this is just through the rumor mill, that this may bring on a period where you're going to maybe see some more forthcoming. We'll see. I think that'd be great. I mean,
I hope so. I mean, I'd love to know more and dig in. I want to ask you, and you're always gracious with your time, but I'm not going to take too much advantage of it. But there are a couple things I want to make sure that I ask you about, and one is really important to me to ask because I think you're receiving some very unfair but loud criticism from a select few, but it's loud enough that I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to respond to utilizing sources that wish to remain anonymous. We've already gone through a lot of what you did to vet. There's going to be way too much more, I know, to talk about in this program to show how much you vetted them. But can you just kind of respond to that criticism a little bit to a journalist? And I know you said you've prefaced it by saying I forget, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you don't like titles, so I don't want to label you too much. But to a journalist, because I think you're well established, you write for well established publications. How important is it, those sources, that they can trust you, that you will maintain their anonymity? But in the same respect, how important is it, that you get that information from sources like that?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the bottom line is here, we're working with areas that individuals who are involved in these programs, and again, I can't stress enough that when I say it's a portfolio on their desk, it means that they've got all this stuff that we don't know about, that thank God we can go to Disney World and be safe because they're able to stop bad people, okay? And then they also have this, because this is something that maybe falls under a technical aspect that they're good at. And so, but they can't go on the record about that because they become a target for espionage by foreign governments, and they can't be effective in making sure we can go to Disney World safely. Mm-hmm. But I stress enough that I don't call myself a journalist simply because my approach is a little different. I approach it like I'm an investigator investigating a crime that I'm going to take to court. So these people are what we would consider confidential informants. And you don't just pick up the crackhead on the street and say, hey, man, tell me who your dealer is, and trust them and believe them. And so I went about it the same way I would have done on the street, where I circle around and I know more about them than they know about me. And so when I approached any of these people, I already had information that I could vet them with by their answers without them knowing. That's kind of how the start of that article, when the person says it was unofficially, it was about UFOs. Well, thanks, bud, and do that for a while. And so it was always, are these people in the position that they could have had access to the things that they said? Can we verify that first? Do they have any vested interest? That's very important, because some of the critique I've got, and I'll just go ahead and say it right now. If that makes me a bad journalist, a bad investigator, I'll take the cake on this. I did not know that Popular Mechanics was owned by Hearst Media, who owns the History Channel. That is not my purview. And the person who brought that up he's not been a jerk to me about it. It's more of an editorial thing. Why didn't the Popular Mechanics edit point that out? History Channel show was furthest thing from my mind. I'm not even worried about that. But, it was, are these sources valid? Can we substantiate them? And do they substantiate the information that others have said without them knowing who I talked to? I mean, when I spoke to, and any of them would gladly, you could call them on three-way, but, like Luis Elizondo got to put off. I think those were some of the people were like, oh, yeah, I got the regular ghost whisperers, huh? I talked to them a week, maybe or two beforehand, and said, hey, this is what I got here. This is what I got. By the way, this guy runs AATIP right now, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, I'm sorry, what? They were the last to come into it because, in all fairness to them, and this is a dig on them, they, they're biased. It could be good bias, but they're biased. I wanted to avoid that. But more importantly than all of that is everything passed through the same editorial reviews and fact-check reviews that any major publication would go through. And so this is not Tim McMillan in a vacuum. In terms of documents, and even documents that I have been very coy and had to plead to post just a little snippet showing the transfer of AATIP. Editors at Popular Mechanics, legal departments at Popular Mechanics, all went through the same types of reviews and publication verification that you would see at any major publication. And so, we can all debate over who's the best at it, whether it's, it's not the news unless it's the New York Times or whatever. But I will just say that I made sure that anybody that was in there, they had to have a reason why their name wasn't used either. And I had to say, I respect that and understand it.
Yeah.
But they still had to be verified and vetted for the editors to stand behind it as well. And so we went through all of these things. When it came to vetting this came up just recently. When it came to vetting that 10-month report, I mentioned I was allowed to have access to it and thumb through it for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. Because I keep telling people, I'm sorry, I don't know everything was in it. For various reasons, there was a time constraint on it. But the verification for that document didn't just extend on, I've seen it now. It came through, this was a valid BAASS document. This, yes, indeed, this came in. And I'll be the first to say that, again, as a behavioral analyst, the first thing that I knew that there was something to that, and I believe it was the SEU conference. I'd have to go back through, but in a Q&A section, and I listened to a lot of what is said candidly at conferences. I believe the question was asked to Luis Elizondo, so when did you get involved with AATIP, or when did you get involved with BAASS? And his answer was, roughly about 10 months. That was a clue. Because the calendar year is 12. Why is that? So there was all these little things that used to vet them. But I would just say that I treated this under the same way I would have to verify these individuals and this information as I would have and have done for almost 2 decades, where I would take it to a courtroom, testify on the stand, and in these instances, people's lives are at stake and they can go to prison for the rest of their life. And so that was the care that I took to it. But I understand why some people didn't want to talk on record. The senior intelligence official who simply added color commentary and gave some background that was in there, saying why you would have brought a CI guy in there. Nothing to do with AATIP, nothing to do with that, nothing to do with UFOs. But he was willing to give an expert opinion on how intelligence operations go. And even he said, and his quotes didn't make it in there, but he said, I'm not giving my name because the culture. If you work in intel, you don't talk, period. If you want to write a book, the agency approves it. And so it's just the nature of the beast, and they don't talk, and there's a reason behind that. And so, I just, the Deep Throat brought down a presidential administration with Nixon, and we didn't know who he was until a couple of years ago. But I stand by all of those sources. And but at the end of the day, if it really bothers anybody and it really, really upsets them, hate me, call me Doty, call me Bill Moore, whatever you want to do. I would rather be the bad guy. I'm not going to dine out any of these people, because I believe that they took a huge risk by disclosing any of this stuff, because I never once doubted that they believe this is something real and serious, and it should be, people should know about.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. And the reason why it meant a lot for me to ask is I feel that criticism is incredibly unfair. I mean, we see it in journalism every day away from UFOs, that there are anonymous sources, White House sources, all this stuff, and we don't bat an eye at it. But since like UFOs is attached to an anonymous source, like, Tim's making it up, he's got to be lying to us all. And that's silly. The investigator in me, of course, I joke around about learning who they are, and I want to know, because that's the nature of who I am. Yet that's not the reality of it, and so that I appreciate you fielding the question, because I do feel that criticism is unfair. And that being said, it's fairly common that we see this in journalism every day here in this day and age.
And I will tell you right here and now, John, and anybody listening, and anybody who's reached out to me, know I am open and willing to discuss with anybody. Like I try to be an open book, and in fact, I'm going to try to get out a blog this week that gives some more background to this, behind the scenes of this, because these people have a question, because it's your show or whatever. Because I won't share the things that I think could damage people who I do believe are good people who are doing it for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And they did not share classified information. I don't seek classified information, nor will I accept it. But they did share things that they didn't want to be attached to. I'm not going to burn them. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry if that hurts people's feelings. But I don't mind a question. And so if people want to ask me the question, if they want to ask me, well, what about the Hearst connection between the History Channel? And I'll say, dude, I'm freelance. Andrew Daniels at Popular Mechanics is my editor. Love the guy, and he's one of the only editors who would let me write an 8,000-word piece for people to enjoy. That's why I went there.
Not to make light of that, but I mean, when you look at how many corporations truly own the world, there's only like 3 of them, and they own like everything. So if you really want to start drawing those lines, pretty much you can't do anything in this day and age, because there's only like 3 corporations that own everything anyway. So anyway, when I read that on Twitter, I'm like, come on, that's, again, I understand maybe what they're trying to say, but some of this stuff is just silly. I think that we've learned in UFO land that you can't make everyone happy, and no matter what you do, you're going to get attacked and so on. But anyway, one of the last things I want to ask you about, Tim, here, it is what we talked about in the very, very beginning and said we'd come back to it. And that is the Luis Elizondo information that you had come across, one of which I pulled it up here because I don't want to get this wrong and make sure everybody knows what it was. It is a portion of a email, I believe, right, that was given to you. And I want to read it, and then I want you to explain it on exactly what this means, because I want to make sure everybody sees it and hears it. Per SecDef, which is the Secretary of Defense, per Secretary of Defense's front office guidance to you and me, I took the liberty of drafting a memo, then there's a portion redacted, that helps you better assume the new responsibilities for AATIP. At your convenience, please review, in parentheses, it's very short on purpose, and let me know if you want me to put more meat on it. So obviously some redactions in there. The source, for obvious reasons, probably doesn't want to be named. That being said, can you explain what that means? Who was it written? Well, not specifically who, but you know what I mean. Like, is there maybe a label here? Who was it written to, and what is this about?
Sure. Yeah, I can. And I'm chuckling when you said meat, because that was the first thing people latched on. Aha! Somebody put a typo. They misspelled meat. Okay. But
no one can make typos in the government. You know this.
Well, no one's allowed to be human. Actually, that, and I'll just say, from a career investigator standpoint, by the way, that's one of those little details that you go, okay, that's probably, typically counterfeits are made really good. But anyway, okay. Yes, that would be a good guess on your part in terms of an email or a correspondence that was between one of the people who was addressed in that email is Luis Elizondo. Absolutely, 100%. His information, everything that was documentation that was produced on DoD servers. So it was in our office there. It was dated October 3rd, 2017. So a day before he officially left the DoD. What you're seeing there, and it is just a small snippet, and I want to make sure I have out why it's so small, is there's a number of people that are CC'd in there. There's a number of people who are named in there who are current government employees, and these particular correspondences were all unclassified, as said. So, however, they would fall under the inter-office deliberative processes type exemption type thing, because that's what they all related to. That was one of 4 others that extended over a several months period of time that essentially detailed the transfer over of another individual who was coming into the DoD, who would be assuming the AATIP program, and it detailed some meetings, and it also detailed the other team members and facility that there's access to. So
this is obviously stating that number one, Mr. Elizondo was essentially the guy in charge, according to this email, transferring responsibilities to somebody else. But you said that, and let me make sure I have this part right, a day before Mr. Elizondo, or around the same time frame that you said Mr. Elizondo resigned, so we're talking about 2017, October of 2017?
Yes.
Obviously stating that AATIP was still around in October of 2017, which pretty much negates everything that the Pentagon has ever said about it being canceled, at least the AATIP program. Yet here we are in 2017, 5 years later, and they're talking about it. Is there any indication why, like, evidence like this is just completely oblivious to the spokespeople, and why they are missing what is obviously a well-established portfolio program? Semantics, call it whatever you want, but AATIP is obviously a thing. They're talking about it. They're drafting memos about transferring responsibilities. Any idea in your research on why there's that disconnect? Because that surprises me in an unclassified setting.
Right. And I don't know if it'd be fair for me to even answer that, because it would be speculating on their part, and I don't know. And I want to make sure that it's clarified too, because I know somebody had the concern that was saying, well, yeah, okay, fine, Lou Elizondo was handling AATIP 2017 just before he left. But I'm talking about those other years, and it is explicitly the correspondence between Ms. Elizondo's one and some other individuals. It is explicitly stated, that you're familiar, you're at least vaguely familiar with this program and have seen some raw videos over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, it for me, and I always caveat this because I'm, definitive, conclusive type thing, because I know that was one of the things people said, well, why did you say it seemingly unambiguously said it? Well, because I didn't write it. I was handed it. Everything appears legit. It appears good. The Pentagon won't return my calls to confirm it. There's nothing about them that would make me think they weren't true. And frankly, it would have been highly reckless, because there are names of people that I know are there. So, it would have been really throwing people under the bus. And I will say this much. I don't know all of the inner workings yet. But in terms of what's going on now with AATIP, it is being handled in a position that is significantly higher than the one that Elizondo maintained. And so, take that for what you will over how important this is to continue.
So
on
it was
the government. If
I understand you correctly, it is somebody much higher in the food chain, so to speak, hierarchy wise within the DoD.
Yes.
If I can ask you, is that part of the information that you said that you passed on to the spokespeople, or are we treading into territory that you kind of left that as off? And I feel bad. I'm poking and prodding, but I'd regret not asking.
No. Dude, like I said, I'm an open book. The Pentagon was made aware of some of this information. Now I will tell people up front as well. I took a page out of BAASS and all of these characters' books, and which means, but I did it so that I could have candid conversations with the Pentagon, as well as that my emails between them, and I don't mind sharing them with people so they see it. I stipulate them under the Federal Trade Secrecy Act up front, saying that my emails to the spokespersons are not foilable under the trade secrecy exemptions. I'm saying, this information that I'm about to tell you, I consider trade secret because it does influence my businesses writing about this stuff. But that allows me to have a little more candid conversation with them as well. And so that's why I do that. And so there were specific offices named. I don't think I named specific people. And because and one thing I'm cautious about is I think specific people that are still doing this, really, just look at the circus that kind of comes with it and this kind of stuff. And I will say this much that I think is important for everybody to walk away from this. Remember, some of the secrecy is not about screwing the public and keeping everybody, down.
Mm-hmm.
It is, information is only as good as the integrity of what you get, the purity of the information you get. And so in certain instances, in some of the collection stuff that they were doing, and not just source and methods with classified systems, but even BAASS, why they would have done some of this is when it's public facing, it allows it to be infected by outside sources. And I'm not talking about just the person who saw 747 reported to MUFON. I'm talking about there are aspects of God, we're not getting too much here. There are aspects where foreign governments I found were interested in this stuff. And so if this is forward facing, foreign governments can interject bad data into your data and then learn what you don't share once it comes out. Because you never, this was a great quote that got cut, is it doesn't matter what it is, you never share. When you're in the intelligence world, you don't share things you don't have an answer to because it's not very intelligent, and they're in intelligence work. And so you can have infections of data. So like that purity of data is very important. And so that's part of the reason for the secrecy, and that's part of the reason that I do respect that the people who are really doing this are actually taking it on. And I'll be surprised, and I'll say this much, I talked to a number of people before I ever spoke to Luis Elizondo with this one, who had worked with him, who had served with him overseas, who had been with him in all these places. And he's a very, whether people realize it or not, take all the UFO stuff out, he's a very respected person in the intelligence community. I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, but he was a White House intelligence aide as well. So
wow, that's new. I've never heard that. That's interesting.
I will say this much: I talked to somebody who was familiar with him, who helped provide some of the information about the meetings with the SecDef aides and the White House aides, who told me that point blank, their words to me were the testament to the job that Elizondo was doing when he was doing what he did with AATIP. He was doing it as the highest GS ranking, General Services ranking, at that time. When he left, that position went to somebody five rankings higher, and in fact higher than the Pacific Fleet Commander in the Navy. So, point being, he was doing it so well at this position that they needed somebody so much higher to match that same level of what he was doing. And they spoke very highly. They said that is a testament to what they're doing. And then, he said, I don't know whether they're looking at UFOs, what the hell they were looking at. But as a worker, the guy generated a lot of respect. And I people come up with all these various theories and everything like that. I'm not selling Lou. I'm not selling TTSA. I said the other day, I'm not even a fan of TTSA. There's a lot of stuff they do that I'm like everybody else. And Nazi bases. What? Yeah. But there's certain stuff that I saw that I thought was interesting, and I think it continues to be interesting.
The one thing I will say is after learning all of that, I don't know what to believe anymore. I really don't, because on one hand, you think you know it, understand it, you see evidence that says yay or nay. I don't know what to say anymore. And one thing in your article, which has been referenced before in past articles by other journalists but never published, was Mr. Elizondo's one of his. I'm sorry, we've been on the air for so long, and I'm drawing a blank of what the name is. But his what's the word I'm looking for? His review, performance review. Yeah, I don't know why I'm drawing a blank already. But yeah, you would publish a portion of his performance review showing passing flying colors. There's no concerns about the guy. They're not saying, yeah, this guy's really dishonest or he's going off the rails or anything like that. My whole point in bringing that up before I blanked on what a performance review was number one, that you had published that. But number two, after interviewing him and sitting down with him and having multiple conversations with him, and hearing him not address every question I have, and to his credit, he acknowledges that with me, that there are certain things that I am posing that he hasn't answered yet. And I kind of feel that there's a mutual understanding there, that he understands it, he gets it. I'm not speaking for him. I'm just saying that was the impression I got. But that being said, after having those conversations with him and getting him on the record on some of this stuff, I mean, I really can't help but, number one, like the guy, but number two, just go, hey, wait a minute. Like, if you really are lying and spinning this tale, you're doing a really good job about it, and you're doing it in a bad way, meaning he's putting himself out there going, hey, look, this is it, and I'm not going to falter. Because after the Pentagon stated what they did about him, I would have bet money, and I was wrong, I would have bet money he would have come out and said, you know what, look, fine, maybe I wasn't this, but I was doing that, okay? And then have some other story, and then it changes. In ufology, I assure you, we've seen that many times before, and yet he never did. And that to me was intriguing. And as the weeks and then the months, and then now here we are, however many months after that whole debacle, I wouldn't say I'm 100% convinced. I will say, though, that, hey, when you think that you've got something worked out in your head, ufology will show you you're generally not right. And this is one of those instances. So not to go off on a tangent, but I wanted to kind of add that there's more evidence coming out. And for Mr. Elizondo to say, I believe this year we will get this rectified. The Pentagon will issue new statements. That was well before. Now they're telling MJ and Vice News and yourself that they're going to be issuing new statements. I joked around about it on Twitter, and I was going to get it too. A popcorn, a bucket of popcorn, because I'm just sitting back watching at this point. I just don't know what to believe anymore. So not to end with a tangent, but that leads into my last question for you is, what's next for you? What do you do from here? After you've seen what you've seen, you've reported on what you've reported on, where are you going next?
I think the Westminster Dog Kennel, this dog show, I think that would be a good one. Figure out who's going to win that one. I'm just kidding.
I wouldn't blame you if that's where you went.
And I'm going to steal 5 more minutes of your time just to because you what you just said. I want to follow up with it because I didn't publish them all, but exactly what you just said, and I can't reiterate that. I mean, I have no problem publishing my same credentials and everything. And say I was a trained John Reed's interrogator, advanced interrogator, and with Alpha Group, I was certified as a criminal profile investigator. And that was one of the first things is when I dealt with Mr. Elizondo, I'm like, I'm not detecting the deception here. Like he really believed it. And then as more documents came in that he didn't get me, I started gathering up from other people, including, the performance review that I published. The only reason it wasn't published in full so that people don't realize this is that it contains stuff in there that reference threats to his life by terrorists. I'm not going to, that's off limits, but that tells you what he's done. But I'm talking about performance reviews going back to when he was overseas with General Mattis. And I mean, I was shocked at some of what I thought was just, grandstanding. Or I can remember at the SEU, and he said, I was in the foxholes with General Mattis. And we all went, digging in the foxholes, Lou, come on. And then I ended up finding 3 people who, I found out that he was part of a very small intelligence group that worked with Mattis. And, 3 different Marines who were like, oh, yeah, Mattis used to hold his intel briefings and stuff in foxholes eating MREs of the troops. He was that kind of leader. And I'm going, okay, he wasn't. Maybe he wasn't lying. And so there was a lot of that that's very interesting. And I just recently, this is after the article has been published, I spoke to somebody who is they are bipartisan. They are detached from it. But they are in and around them daily. In them, I say Lou and everything. And they said, man, no, they believe in what they're saying. I mean, whether it's really alien, UFO, or China, or whoever is irrelevant. But they're like, no, this whole disinfo, and I know that's a sexy theme, but I don't even have to get into we can do that another show about the whole legal ramifications of that. But I would just say that was a very interesting aspect, and all things point to me that he believes it, and those were in those documents. Just so you know, the transfer of power. I mean, these were not things that he knew, and nor did he make public. So he didn't know these were public. These were correspondence that went on late 2016, early 2017, where he was expressing the same things that you hear him saying on TV in private correspondences with people in the DoD I think this is a very important national security issue. I want to meet and discuss this, and this. And so that's, take it for what he wants. I think that kind of changed the dynamic for me. It's interesting.
Yeah.
So I'll get off that little soapbox. But yeah, if you've got any good questions, I don't know, whatever you got, man. If you're tired and good, I'm still good. Whatever you want to do.
No, I appreciate that. No, I think that the last thing is where you are going to go essentially next. You know, and are you planning follow-ups? Do you have stuff in the works? I mean, at this point, it's a waiting game with the government side, and that's where I joke about getting the popcorn, because it's you know, it's going to be very interesting to see them respond to this. Now, they may have a reasonable explanation, but the fact that they are going on the record with, again, yourself and with Vice News stating we are going to respond to this, that in itself, to me anyway, from my very small experience with them, is that implies they are changing something. Because a very quick example, that 2009 Harry Reid letter, it was very quick for them to say, we are not changing our stance. When I took that letter that allegedly had proven that Mr. Elizondo had headed the program, I had just plopped it digitally from George Knapp's story to the Pentagon stating, okay, can we get an updated statement here if that's what this proves? And it was like that, where they're like, no, it doesn't change anything. Now, the reason I bring that up is when they're not changing anything, it seems like it's rapid pace. When they start saying, Tim, delay your article, hold the presses at Popular Mechanics, that to me implies we have a major shift coming. Now, what that is, I have no idea, and I'm not going to pretend and guess, but I would say that there's probably something big coming. I asked you earlier, and I'll ask you again, do you think that is potentially the case where they're going to alter their course? Or do you think they're going to come up with some cockamamie excuse that to them makes sense, like time traveling Roswell bodies that, you know, were aliens or something? I don't know.
I think you could probably, I mean, everybody should just go ahead and prepare and understand, no matter what, you know, any government statements are made on the basis that, you know, it's PR. And so you don't you know, Nike doesn't come out and say, hey guys, we really screwed up with that shoe. Okay. You know, my bad. It's going to be tempered and that kind of thing. But I agree with you that the amount of time and what was last relayed to me, that it had gone through multiple iterations and multiple offices, meant that there was a lot of hands involved of how do we handle this most effectively? And you're right, because the easy answer was, Tim, we don't give a shit what you just said. It doesn't change a thing, you know. But that wasn't it. And so I would. They borderlined it all. I think it's at the point where I think it would be good for everybody if indeed that's the truth. All the evidence points to that's the truth. Is saying exactly the same reason that Susan Go is handling all of the DoD complaints or all the DoD inquiries for the UFOs, is to say, you know what, guys? We've already admitted these were UAPs in these videos. We ain't throttled off that. We just admitted not too long ago to Swedish researcher Roger Glassel that, you know, these events occur and the branches who they occur under investigate them. Well, doesn't it make logical sense if you've narrowed it into one PR person to handle all those inquiries, that you would narrow all those into one office and say across all sorts of different government agencies? So I think coming out and saying, you know what, hey, we're not saying it's aliens. I don't see that happening. I don't see them saying anything other than saying there is, you know, potentially an office that still kind of handles this and ferrets out this information. And, you know, maybe Mr. Elizondo did do a little bit there. You know, I don't know how they'll go there. You know, they may say that in light of some of the new information that, you know, Kit Green's study was not peer reviewed, but it was considered a product of it. And yeah, he wrote a bunch of UFO stuff in there. So you can't deny that. That's why I gave him everything, though. I hope everybody understands. It was because I'm not about gotcha journalism. And I think that, again, personal belief, I think that the government probably, they definitely know more than we know. They definitely have the classified systems and all these things. You know that. The idea that they have any secret government alliances with the Blue Avians or, you know, the Serpo journeys back and forth. I don't think that's the case, personally. But I do think that maybe, maybe it would be nice. I think there's a lot of people, and before I get off, I want to make sure that point's clear. Since that article came out, people would be shocked and I'm not going to name names, but some of the people that I have heard from, very legitimate journalists, very legitimate individuals out there in the society, commercial airline pilots, military, people whose names would be known, I'll put that much, who are like, look, man, I can't come out and say this publicly to anybody, but man, thanks for pushing this, because 2 years ago, me and my girlfriend were camping and this happened to us. This happened to those. And so, and for the secret invisible college that's out there, the people who are largely involved in that BAASS thing, I hope that they recognize that me trying to get legitimate information put out there is every much for them and BAASS and Mr. Bigelow as it is the public. Because, dude, no one should have to live and die. These people wouldn't have invested their entire lives for an illegitimate topic they think is BS.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't live and die with that. And I think that and to some degree, maybe the passing of Stanton Freeman had an effect on me there, because he knew in his heart this was a legitimate topic. I think other people should respect that as well, no less than you respect a cosmologist who looks at dark matter and dark energy. That could be magic pixie dust too.
Yeah,
can't photograph it, and so I would hope that starts happening. I think that's what I've been impressed by, is the number of people who PhDs who reached out and said, hey man, no, this is legit. I saw it with my kids. I saw this. So I want to know. And I think there shouldn't be an invisible college. You should be able to do real serious work out in public. And so that's what I would like to see. I know other people are ready for the Roswell bodies. I might pass out. I don't know what the hell I'll do if that happens. But,
yeah. So your follow-up article you're saying is Thursday, maybe Friday? That you're coming out with that?
We're going to hit print now. No.
It's in edit.
Yes. The follow-up, I think, is going to be, what do we do now? I mean, that's what I kind of kick around. What are we going to do now? I have been talking to some other people that can give a more current picture of what is happening now and what some individuals want to see happen. Some of the individuals, because I think when people see at least some, what some of these individuals are trying to push in a government level, I don't see how anybody could not get behind it. Yeah. And I mean that from the skeptics to everybody. And so let's get that out. It's an election year.
Yeah.
I've often said more
those
people
questions
watch
are being
Dave
asked.
Beatty's. Well, I mean, more people watch Dave Beatty's Nimitz film than the popular vote between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. You can't tell me it's not an American issue. So, that's the difference maker. And the quote that was cut out of the Harvard professor, Dr. Culbreth, who was a great man who gave me that quote, he said it, and I believe it, is that it's not the government's job to decide. If 70% of the American people believe the government's hiding something, 50% believe that there's something to the UFO project, well, it doesn't matter. It's their money. It doesn't matter if you want to spend $22 million on a new bomb. Yeah. If the people want this, and that is what they're supposed to be doing. Yeah. So hopefully we'll see some. I mean, so the next one may be a little more political. Yeah. Maybe we'll do it. I'll call you up and we'll have 1 million Black Vault Man march. Yeah. Onto Washington.
No, that's
storm the Pentagon.
Hey, this is the year for it. So, Tim, you're always gracious with your time. I know we got started about 10 minutes early and you gave me 30 minutes over. So that's awesome. But I really do want to say thank you, on behalf of everybody who's interested in this topic. Wherever you sit on the fence, there is no denying that your research, your articles, your journalistic skills is pushing the needle. And I always have respect for that. To whomever does it, and it's a very short list of those who do, and you're one of them, which is why you make so many repeat appearances on this program. So hopefully you'll come on again. I always like to plug websites. Yours, chasingthecoyotestail.com. Is it back online? I know it was down for a little bit.
Contrary to the conspiracies that were out there,
Uh-huh.
yes, it is back online. CoyotesTale.com, which is where I do more of the UFO-centric stuff. You can always go to LTTimMcMillan.com, and you can get links to writings, and you can get links to Coyote's Tale. You can find me on Twitter and tell me I'm a POS. Lots of people do that. Don't worry, you'll fit right in. And you know, I'm always out there. And I can't. It may take me a while to get back to emails and tweets and direct messages, but I mean that. And if people have questions or concerns, don't sit there and whine on Twitter about it and BS about it.
There's enough
of
that.
Just ask me, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have a fun conversation. I encourage everybody. You know, I'm not afraid to discuss it, because I'm not trying to sell the snake oil show, and I can be wrong.
Yeah.
And so I encourage people to keep going through with this, because I cannot stress enough, man. It's people like you, Joe Murphy was cited in there. He was able to offer some great stuff from Dr. Everett Davis. I mean, so that's, this is a compilation of stuff that happens. I hope everybody gets the credit that does. So as much as people say, "Oh, your great article was great," I'm like, dude, there's some damn good investigators out here and damn good researchers, and so I'm thankful for all of them.
Well, thank you for that, and again, thank you so much again. For all of those who aren't aware, if you're listening on the recorded audio version, I stream these videos, most of them anyway, live on the YouTube channel. You can get to that at www.theblackvault.com/live. That will bounce you to the YouTube channel where you can find all of this. And if you're watching live and don't know, I take these live streams and put them into podcast form. You can get those at theblackvault.com. Just enter the site anywhere. It is on the right-hand side. Make sure you subscribe to all of what I just mentioned. That way you get notified the next show. Tim, I really do appreciate your time. I'm sure you'll be back again soon. I'm looking forward to your next one, so thank you.
No, John, always a pleasure, my friend. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.
Anytime. And thank you all for listening. This is John Greenwald Jr. signing off. We'll see you next time.